I'll start with a little background. This is a detailed report of a trip that spans the course of 3 days. I am not 100% sure on all of the details of the trip, as I can't truly recall everything. Clues I found in my house after the trip help, though, and chronologically this story is quite accurate. Background. A friend and I have been serious into drugs for years now, we'll call him Chris. Between the two of us, we've tried nearly every drug that could even be slightly considered recreational, drugs many of you have likely never heard of. Then came inevitability, delirious. The day finally came where there were just no drugs left to try. After reading extensively, we turned to delirious. It was all that was left to try. We meticulously grew and picked Datura plants that we had grown and cultivated over an indeterminate stretch of time. The day came when the plant was ready to be ingested. We separated a significant portion of seeds, 600 apiece. Looking back, the dose was absolutely ridiculous, and we are very, very lucky to be alive. I should be a dead man right now. The mentality behind the dose was something along the lines of we are too experienced not to do this much, and our bodies are too used to drugs, etc. Essentially, we were too tough for Datura, and thus took a very stupid dose and a very stupid risk. The trip. Day 1. D+0 o'clock, D+1 o'clock. Jen, a friend of mine, came over to sit with us. We ingested 600 seeds each as quickly as possible and washed them down with a glass of milk. We then locked all the doors and windows to my house as to prevent any drug-induced rampages, police run-ins, or worse. Chris and I plopped down in front of my new big screen, and began watching a movie. About an hour into it, I started to feel the effects. The dry mouth came on, as in other trip reports. I had no idea it would be this strong. My legs felt like rubber and my body was completely out of whack. I looked over to Chris to tell him it was kicking in and I found even this simple task disorienting. He confirmed the same experience thus far. In what was the stupidest move of the century, Jen decided she was bored and that she would take 150 seeds. Now, she's had her experiences with drugs before, but she was our sitter. D+3:00. As time passed, it seemed to stretch. Much like a DXM trip, I lost all reference of time. The only indicator was a digital clock, which would have been impossible to read if it weren't for the large readout. The movie had since finished, and the television was airing some show about cops. I honestly couldn't tell you what it was I was watching, but all the lights and colors melded into this visual supernova that I couldn't stop staring at. Chris grunted strangely, and I looked over to see him sliding off the couch. I became frightened because at that very moment, the room had vanished. We were stranded on a couch in a burning hallway. I grabbed Chris and pulled him back onto the couch so that he wouldn't get burned. He looked at me with his massive pupils and spoke an unrecognizable string of words. Time slowed as he spoke. His voice echoed in slow motion, and his pupils expanded beyond his eyes, spiraling toward me. I was intrigued at what I was seeing when Jen grabbed my shoulder from the other couch. She was engulfed in flames and ran from the couch up into my bedroom. I laid on my bed trying to make sense of everything when I saw a man looking in through my window. Unable to make out his face, I was frightened. It was dark outside, and I was on the second floor. Impossible, but I believed it. D+5:00. Jen opened the door to my room. She shouted something and laid next to me. Her face twisted and turned as I stared and I couldn't remember where we were. D+8:00. I must have blacked out, because 3 hours had passed and I was still lying with Jen in my bed, only we were now both naked. Did we have sex? Why was I naked? What happened? I had no explanation, but somehow I didn't seem to need one. We tried to have sex, which is weird in itself since we had never so much as kissed before this. I was too far gone to know what I was doing, and then I went black again. D+11:00. I came to. Sprawled on my bedroom floor, I was now by myself. I noticed a residue on my body, leading me to believe that we had sex, but Jen was nowhere to be found. I walked into the kitchen looking for her, but there was no kitchen beyond my bedroom door. I stepped into a supermarket, only it was closed, and there was no food on the shelves. I ran back downstairs into the TV room, where I had last seen Chris. The room was black. I saw nothing but a body, hovering in midair. It was Chris, who seemed to be sleeping. D+12:00. I decided I needed a cigarette. Interestingly enough, I had one in my ear at the time. I smoked it, and took another one from my now reloaded ear. Where were these coming from? D+13:00. I grew tired, but I still hadn't found Jen. I walked upstairs and immediately upon opening the door I needed to lie down. I thought I was in some kind of endless field, and that I was sleeping on the grass. There I slept for almost 20 hours. D+3300. I awoke, still hallucinating. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten there, but it seemed to be a house that wasn't my own. I proceeded into the living room to come across a naked woman, Jen. She sat in her chair, talking to nobody. When I entered the room, she saw me and immediately took off running. Where did she go? Who was she? D+3500. I needed to leave. I was in a strange house and I was stuck. I ventured into what I thought was a bedroom. It turned out to be a balcony. On the balcony, I found a man's clothing but no man. Were these mine? I looked out into the backyard and there on the ground was a man, naked. Somebody had fallen. Luckily they landed in the water. D+3600. I proceeded into the next room, intrigued as if I were investigating some deserted mansion. A radio hummed, though I saw no radio. I noticed a sliding glass door to the back, and tried to open it. This was a strange door, and I couldn't seem to open it. I felt trapped. I knew it was some kind of illusion. I jumped through it and I was right. There was nothing there, and I was finally outside, free from the prison. There was a truck on the side of the road that I noticed from where I was standing. I decided to hitch a ride and try to get back home. I jumped into the bed of the truck and waited. Shortly thereafter, the driver got in and we were off. I laid still so not to attract attention, when all of a sudden a friend of mine from high school appeared. I hadn't seen him in ages, but he was going to blow my cover. I remembered I was naked, and I didn't want him to see me. I tried to close my eyes, but he was still there. I shouted and tried to struggle with him, but he disappeared. D+? The truck stopped. I was found out. The driver got out and saw me. He had no facial features, no mouth, no nose, no eyes. I jumped from the bed and began to run, naked and scared. This is my last memory. There is no further evidence as to what happened after this point, but I awoke hours later, finally somewhat sober. I opened my eyes, and there were 3 people staring at me. I was naked, bleeding and covered in my own feces. I huddled in the corner of whatever room I was in. It was a family. They found me and tried to keep me safe. I was in southern New Hampshire, after starting in Maine. I was almost 3 hours from my home with no recollection of how I got there. The family offered me clothing and enough money to take the bus back home. Aftermath. I returned home to find my house in ruins. The sliding glass door I had imagined was my bedroom window. Chris was lying on the ground in my yard after falling from the 2nd floor. He had no clothing on. He was alive, but broke his right leg. I found Jen in my bathtub, still naked and sleeping. My life was hysteria for 48 hours. I'm not sure how all 3 of us survived the trip.